Chicago, and
Oh,
I grew up on the south side of Chicago.
okay.
And all of the hip, slick, and cool cats in my neighborhood did opioids. So they, even before heroin, they were drinking cough syrup, and they was taking Tuanols and Secanols and barbiturates. So all of the players was taking some kind of opioid. And the whole look was that nod and that frown and the walking slow. That was the thing. So even before I ever started, the first time I started, I joined the military at 16, underage, and went to Germany. And one weekend in Amsterdam, when I was 16 years old, I stuck a needle in my arm. And I was 16 years old. And by the way, in 1973 in the military, everybody in Europe, not everybody, but it seemed like everybody in Europe was on heroin. So people were smoking hash and they were shooting heroin. And that was all over Germany. That was all different ranks. That was all different races. So, this heroin thing ain't new. It's been around for ever since all my life.
So you say, would you say, or safe to say it was an epidemic back then?
Absolutely. But it didn't seem to matter though. People, it didn't cause the same kind of alarm or concern because most of the heroin seemed to be centralized in the urban communities, in communities of color. So you would see it in Harlem and the south side of Chicago and in Detroit and in Miami City. You would see it in places where black and brown people were clustered. And at that point, it didn't seem to be as big of a concern. My suspicion is it became a big concern when it started to branch out into the suburbs, when it started to affect mainstream society.
It's no longer an inner city issue.
Exactly.
It's in the rural parts of the community.
Absolutely.
It's in the suburban community, and it's affecting mainstream society.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's gone beyond just heroin. It's this whole prescription drug, this surge in the the prescribing of prescription drugs at a rate that's probably quadruple what it was several years ago.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, you being a person in long-term recovery, and you encounter individuals who have opioid addiction, is there a difference in terms of how you help them with their road to recovery, their journey to recovery, than it was when you first became a professional in this field?
Well, one of the things, see, I've been doing this work since I had 6 months clean and sober. So I have been working as an addiction professional continuously since that time. I've seen a lot of different approaches in how you work with addicts, and particularly with heroin addicts or opiate addicts. And nowadays, there's a big kind of theme in this treatment approach that opiate addicts are somehow have a diminished opportunity to get clean, that the cravings are too strong, that the recidivism rate is too high. And so we need to, instead of trying to encourage them to be abstinent, that the big movement is to put them on some sort of replacement opiate. And so we're seeing methadone maintenance and Suboxone and Subutex as a method of dealing with heroin addicts and opiate addicts, particularly because of the doubt that many people have that a heroin addict can get clean. I challenge that. I have never believed that heroin addicts can get clean. As a matter of fact, my approach is almost opposite. I think that if you're addicted to heroin, different than most other drugs, with heroin, when you have a heroin or opiate addiction, you know you're out of control. See, heroin addicts don't have a fantasy that I can do it in moderation, that I can have just a little bit, that it ain't no problem. Because once you become dependent on any kind of opiate, you have to have it or you go through pretty severe withdrawal symptoms. And so I think based on that the heroin addict is less likely to try to do controlled drinking or controlled using or moderate using. And so abstinence is actually a really appropriate goal. And so, what I do is I have a lot of hope. And when I'm in the rooms, I'm in these board rooms and I'm in these rooms with the clinicians making decisions about treatment. They don't know I'm an ex-heroin addict. They don't know that was my drug of choice. They don't know I've been on methadone and all of that. And they start to talk about heroin addicts can't get clean. And I have to say, hey, wait a minute. We can get clean. You're looking at a heroin addict who's been clean for decades. And as a matter of fact, I know a whole bunch of heroin addicts that are clean. So, my approach is to instill some hope. I kind of am going against the party line in terms of how treatment is moving, where the direction is moving. I believe that abstinence is an appropriate goal. I believe that it's a small percentage of the heroin addicts who are actually appropriate candidates for maintenance narcotics. I think before we put somebody on maintenance narcotics, we need to first find out if they're able to be abstinent.
Very good. So what do you say, Roland, to that person for the first time that enters your room, enters your presence, and say this heroin, these prescription pills have been whipping me and I need help?
Yeah.
What would you say to that person?
I say you can do it. I say, I hear you, man. I know how you feel. And I believe that you can get clean. I tell them that they can get clean. That there's a way out. That you ain't got to live your life as a slave to this drug. That if you want some freedom and you're willing to put some work in, that there's a way out for you. And I've seen a whole lot of people make it out, Dre. I've seen a lot of straight hope to die addicts hooked on a drug that if they don't have it, they're physically tore up. I see them get their life back.
Tell me, I know you've shared with me in the past some of your international travels. What are some of the countries you've worked at and educated and empowered people about addiction? I know you've done a lot of private executive recovery coaching around the world. Can you talk about some of the places you've been?
Well, what I've been doing for the last 15, 20 years, my focus in my work has been, I'm an addictions therapist and I'm a trainer and a consultant. And one of the focuses in my career over the last decade and a half is to help programs function at a higher level and then to work with people individually. So I told you I first started shooting dope in Amsterdam, so I went back to Amsterdam in 2008 and helped set up the first abstinence-based treatment center. I've set up programs in the Dominican Republic. I've trained staff in Japan and Thailand. I've helped open programs in Thailand and consulted with programs in Thailand. I've worked with private clients, high-profile clients in Switzerland and Paris and Milan. I've been all over the place. I've been fortunate. I've worked in Spain. So I've been fortunate in my ability to reach people from different cultures and in different environments. I feel blessed to be able to have done that.
So you've had this exposure on the national frontier.
On the international frontier. Absolutely.
International, because we know we're dealing with a global
absolutely
and a local national issue phenomenon.
And it's all over the world. People are struggling with these drugs all over the world, with different kind of drugs everywhere.
So I was reading some statistics recently that said America consumes 80% of the world's drugs.
Yeah. We're greedy. We're a greedy country. And not only do we consume 80% of the world's drugs, we consume about 80% of the world's resources. So not just drugs, we can do that with alcohol, we do that with luxury products, we do that with food, we do that with gasoline. We're hungry in the U.S. We have a belief system that seems to be prominent in the U.S. that says that if I don't feel good, something's wrong, and I need to eat something, drink something, buy something, drive something, screw something, hit something, control something in order to be okay. We have a very low tolerance for not being okay, so we always trying to get some more of whatever.
Any last minute words?
Well, you asked me about my friend who overdosed.
Yes.
Who was talking about my buddy.
Tell me about that. You lost me.
Yeah, just very quickly, the cold part about addiction is that the recidivism rate is really high. Most people who try to get clean and sober fail. They talk about this addiction thing, and the recovery from addiction is a hero's journey. Like if you're gonna be successful in recovery, you got to put some work in. And we live in an addicted society, so there's a lot of temptation and there's a lot of ways. That's why I'm so proud of the work that you're doing, that you're reaching people from all different walks of life right in the trenches, and you're giving them some skills that they need in order to be successful to achieve long-term recovery, because it's not intuitive. Once you get caught up in this, it's not intuitive, and there's always this pull to come back. And so my buddy who got clean, who was very active in 12-step recovery, and God bless the 12-step programs like Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous for giving people a refuge, giving people a safe place with like-minded folks to talk about what they're struggling with. And my buddy was a very active member of a 12-step program. He would show up and he would carry the message. He would share his experience, strength, and hope. And he relapsed. You know, he had some stuff going on in his life, and it contributed to a relapse. And he went back to using heroin. And they say that a mind full of recovery and a body full of dope is a bad combination. See, once you've been exposed to this recovery thing, once you get high again, it just don't fit. You be in the dope house talking about your sponsor. You be in the dope house hearing the voices from guys like Charlie C. or Dr. Trent that you heard in the rooms. And so he didn't stay out long. And I was at an event about 6 weeks ago, and I was speaking, and he was back in recovery, sitting in the front row with his people, with all of us who love him. And I know that they didn't welcome him in the dope house when he came back the same way we welcomed him in the rooms when he came back. And I said from the podium, man, it's so good to see you. Man, I'm so glad you made it back, because I and many other people would have been tore up if you wouldn't have made it back. Because we know that when people relapse, all of them don't make it back. Your next time you use can be the last time you use. And so we welcomed him back. He was back for 2 or 3 weeks. I saw him last weekend at a recovery meeting, gave him a big old hug. He told me, man, thanks for that nice stuff you said at the event. I got a phone call yesterday that he found him dead, that he had overdosed. And what that does for me is it reaffirms the respect that I have for this disease. It reaffirms that we have a very powerful adversary in our fight against addiction, and it kills people. Its job is to kill people. And so we need the Andre Johnsons, we need the Dr. Trents, we need the people all over the country that are fighting this thing. You know, not for political purposes, not for financial purposes, not to manipulate a system, but in order to help the people that are still suffering out there. So that's why I do what I do, and I know that's why you do what you do.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, brother. I love you, man.
Love you back, brother.
Y'all gotta come out.